I'm Anthony Ford, and this is Deck Armor Rewind. Today, we're going to be looking back on a deck system that my company, Kong Armor, the world's toughest deck armor, and its deck restoration, deck rescue painters, restored and armor encapsulated a few years ago in Union, Kentucky. And this episode right here is going to show you guys what I tell people often. 95% or more of the deck structures, decks, backyard structures here in northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, southeast Indiana, they don't need replacement even in their worst conditions. So even when they get severely weathered, dilapidated, have peeling paint, disintegrating, flaking stains, this type of stuff, it's rare for them to need replacement. A lot of them need restoration and a really good resurfacing. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But decks are very simple structures, and it's very rare for your entire deck to be not viable. They're built from pine, and they're very long-lasting structures, and they can go through a lot of refinishing processes without the need for replacement, especially when you have an industrial grade coating like Kong Armor that can resurface and rebuild the structures of these old decks. Let's not waste no more time here. Let's get moving through these pictures. I called this deck the Chad deck, okay? And if I'm not mistaken, this was 2019, 2020, somewhere in that ballpark. You guys can see over here, we definitely had this deck had some type of semi-transparent stain that was on it, and it was all but gone. If you can see over here where I got my mouse, you can kind of see the fade in there. There's something going on here, and algae growth and that type of stuff all over it here on the stairs. Let's keep going through here. I haven't looked at these pictures fully yet, so I'm looking at them really for the first time with you. I just kind of opened the folder. It's just another shot, but you can see it, all the mildew growth. When this guy mows his lawn, it kicked up grass and stuff all over his steps there. So tons of mildew growth. Kind of better look at the condition of this deck. Just sun-kissed. That's basically here at Kong what we call these decks. They've been kissed by the sun. They've been beat down by the sun, beat down by wind-driven rain, expansion and contraction, that type of stuff. You can see over here he's got some checking in his post and his deck post cracks, but other than that, the outside of the structure and the frame of the structure looks sound. That's not the case when we get further up in here, and I'll show you that. Pretty little deck. Absolutely pretty little deck. Simple deck system, right? Now we're going to start digging in to the problems of this structure, what it had wrong with it, and none of it, almost none of it, was in the frame or the structure of the deck, and that's the case 95% of the time. Typically, it's always going to be in the floor or the cap rails or something like that that has problems. So this is the floor of this deck, and this is where I kind of want to show you what happened here. If you look here, the way this deck floor was designed was bad. This was a bad deal, and I see a lot of decks that are like this, and they all have the same problem. So what happens is there's a board that they lay through here in order to do this, and I think I have some more pictures of this later on in here. But whereas most decks, they'll just have boards that go straight across horizontally, they did this diagonal pattern here. And in order to pull off this diagonal pattern, they had to put a spacer board up underneath it here, which is not this board that you see, but it's actually like a ledge where this all sits on. And what happens is water gets down in there, and it's a flat surface. Underneath of this board right here, there's a flat surface where any water that drains down in between there when it rains, it sits there in that flat surface for days and weeks at a time. And what happens is it starts building up mildew, decay, moisture, and then rot starts to set in. Fastener corrosion starts to set in. And these boards will start rotting right here on the edges I don't even know what's in here, so let's look further and see if I can kind of show you more what I'm talking about. He had several boards like this deck. This floor design was the whole culprit of why this deck was the deck floor had rot. I don't think there was any rot over here. I think it was all confined to here, and we ended up going through here and replacing a lot of them. Let's take a look here. You can see that stain that kind of just came off of this deck everywhere. This is just simple. Stain does not last here in northern Kentucky and Cincinnati. If you apply a semi-transparent stain to your deck system, you're basically throwing your money in the garbage. The sun and just the temperatures and just the pure expansion and contraction of the wood here will decimate any type of stain, semi-transparent stain, anything like that that you guys throw on your decks or outdoor structures. Not going to last here in the tri-state. I don't think it lasts anywhere in America outside. To me, stain is an indoor product, and you can kind of see that problem everywhere on this deck system. It just didn't hold up. There's more shots of that mildew growth, severe weathering, that type of stuff. Here in a minute, when I show you the after pictures, you're going to see the ultimate resurfacing power of Kong Armor and how it's able to take old weathered wood like this and just absolutely, it'll fill in all of its cracks, all of its voids, lock down its splinters. And unlike stain, it's high stretch, so it can put up with that wood movement, and it just really builds this out beautifully. Hold on, we'll get there. That's definitely not it. Oh, the wood. This was us getting the wood. There's where I'm talking about. You guys see that? That's what they had to place in there. So look, this is a joist, this is a joist, this is a joist that runs up underneath the deck, right? Well, look, they had to place in there little spacers in between each joist so that they could lay down this deck board. And boy, it just did not. It caused a lot of problems, and I'm talking a lot of problems. You can see where all that dirt and grime and that type of stuff sits up in there and just collects water. And now that I think about it, I don't know why they had these in there rather than just placing the board on top of there. But I do remember when we were refinishing this, there was some sort of logical reason why those spacers were there, and we were like, oh, that's why they put them there. Just at first glance, you would kind of think like, hey, why did they put those spacers in there? Why didn't they just put the top board in there? But there was some type of reason, and I can't remember what it is right now. But this design here destroys deck floors. If you've got this at your house, you need to get rid of it immediately. I think we drilled holes through these, tons of holes, so that any water, after we left, any water that passed through there could escape down in there. And I don't remember why these are here, but there was a reason. No, that's what it is. That's what it is. This is actually a ledge of some sort, and these are not spacers. That's what it is. I remember now. This is actually a ledge that the deck actually sits on, and they came in and put a board on top of that. That's what it was. I remember now. I don't know if I can And back on both sides is rotted wood, right? This is a cross member here. This is a cross member that they've added so that they can put this fancy little pattern in, right? So that they have a place where all the boards can meet in a straight line. Problem is, this is the bad situation. All this does is hold water. When you put a cross member in like this, where's the water going? There's nowhere for the water to go. So what they've done is they've created a situation where this is just a giant water catch here. This is a board that sits here normally, right? And these boards extend out to about right here, each side, maybe about right there, a little bit past that nail, each side. So now I understand. So in order for them to pull off this deck, this design, let me go back here. In order for them to pull off this design, they had to have an area where the ends of these boards could be fastened down, because a lot of them landed where there were no joists at the end, meaning a lot of them landed where they couldn't fasten them down naturally with the joists. So they actually had to come on the underside of the deck and add boards up underneath of there and make this sort of ledge where all of these boards had something that they could nail into to hold them down and secure them. And basically, there's a there's a board that runs all the way up through here, and this it comes into here, and there's a board that runs all the way down through there where they can hammer them down, and it's just a flat water catch is all it is. It's a disastrous design, right? And that's why this deck was rotting out everywhere.
Union Kentucky Chad deck.
I remember that now. I absolutely remember that. And this is there's a better look at it. See, I told you guys, like, I'm looking at this the same time as you guys are looking at it, the same exact time. I didn't go through this folder and look at it in advance. I probably should have, but look, there, that shows you how they were landing these boards, because here's a joist. Normally we would just land them on the joist, but since they were doing them diagonally, there's nowhere to land them. So they had to bring in this board all the way down the middle of the deck system so that they could land these boards diagonal like that. And it's just absolutely goofy. It just absolutely destroyed this deck floor because of its design. And what we did was we actually came through here when we ripped all these up. We took, obviously, the customer, we're doing restoration, we're not doing replacement, right? And that's the cool thing about Kong is you keep what's good on your deck. So we're not doing a whole floor replacement. He only had about 14 or 15 bad boards. So what we did was we went in, and where they put this, we drilled a bunch of holes. So any water from then on that got down in there, it had an escape route so it could dry out. And that's the best we could do for them in that scenario without tearing down their whole deck floor and rebuilding it, right? Which the customer didn't want to go through that expense. And they shouldn't have to. A little bit of joist damage there, not a big deal, right? That's from fastener corrosion. I believe we put some sisters there where we needed to. But even with this weird design, think about this for a second. Most companies that will come out and look at this for this customer, they're going to say, hey, you need to tear down your whole deck system or tear it down to the frame. Let's redo your floor, 25, 30 grand, that type of stuff. When the deck was sound and functional, 3/4 or more of this deck system, there was nothing wrong with it. And especially when you have an industrial grade coating like Kong where you can resurface these decks, they're indefinitely viable. So most of the time, this customer is going to be relegated to a replacement or something like that just because a contractor or company will over exaggerate this, you know, and turn it into a bigger deal than what it is, and hit them in the pocketbook where it really hurts. And deck replacement, tear down to the frame replacement, it's always an investment that the customer can never get back, because even if you tear your deck down to the frame, you replace it, you do composite, you do new wood, whatever you do, it's not going to increase the value of your home. Your home's still going to be worth whatever the three houses around you total median combined is. That's what your home's going to be worth. It's money you can't get back, and you don't need to do it. So here we get into the finish. So, we replaced all those. I think this was after one coat of Kong. So I don't think this was the finish. I think this was more uh, during the process of coating it. But even after one coat of Kong, you can see how the outside of that deck system just stunning now. Looks practically brand new. This was a few years ago, and remember, now my decks, they won't finish with any of these cracks in them, in their post or anything like that. But even then, look, all the bolts are encapsulated. Very few openings on the outside of this deck. Look at that, beautiful. Wow. See, nowadays when I do decks, unless the customer, Kongs are very thick and we have that silverback epoxy. So unless the customer asks specifically to keep these knots, you guys see these knots and that type of stuff in there, I'll take all those knots out. You see the knots in here, that type of stuff, these knots over here, I'll take those knots out. They won't have those knots. It'll all look, I've gotten a lot better. The deck will look all synthetic and high build. Not that this deck system didn't finish gorgeous, because it did. See how that floor, you see how Kong built out that floor? Just thick build. We went in there and drove into all those cracks in that floor. I showed you guys at the beginning of the video. Drove into all those cracks. You know, you guys remember this was all very severely weathered. This turned out almost composite looking and just beautiful. High build, ultra tough. And this is, yeah, I can see over here. So this is actually in between coats, but you still have film drying over here. This is how the deck turned out when we were done. And again, today, my decks that we coat and refinish with Kong probably would be twice as beautiful as this, because I layer them twice as thick now. Not that there's anything wrong with this finish. This finish was gorgeous. It turned out really well. Just beautiful. If I could go back and focus on some things on this deck, I would have went in and worked on trying to get, using silverback to take out some of these knots that were in the structure. Fill them in with that silverback. And then when we coated over this, all this here would look a lot more synthetic. But this is gorgeous. This is gorgeous. See, we got all those bad boards out of there and got new boards in there just where he needed it. So only the 12 or 13 boards that were bad, not the entire floor, or tear down to the frame, right? And completely redo. That's the benefit of deck rescue painting from Kong Armor, where we're coming in and you get to keep every ounce of your structure that's still good and viable. And the savings from that are absolutely humongous. And instead of you throwing all that equity away that you can never get back, remember, I just told you can never get it back. Think about that for a second. You get to save all that. That's huge. Then on top of that, never having to completely paint or stain your deck again, because you've switched over to an industrial grade elastomer that can just be washed annually and spot touched up as needed. So you're going to save in the long run too. Big deal. I remember this deck. It turned out beautiful. Turned out beautiful. Today, I don't know if this was in between coats, but on my structures now, let me see something here real quick. I can do this. On my structures now, you'll have very little of this type of stuff left. Do you see this? See these like little cracks that you can see? I might let one or two of those go, but I don't let very many more than that go now. So I would focus on that more if I had a chance to redo this deck today with the knowledge that I have today. And that's what's kind of cool about this show also, is that I can take you guys back and show you that also some of the mistakes that I made as a proprietor, right? One of them here that I would focus on better would be covering over these floor screws and nails here. Today, my decks, they finish where these are completely closed off. Absolutely completely. And the finish is very synthetic and high build, right? But I didn't have a lot of the knowledge about fastener corrosion that I do now. And so my customers now, they gain from that knowledge. I've been through this. I understand now why these rot, what happens with fastener corrosion and them not being properly protected and causing board rot, right? So now I completely cover over all of our fasteners on decks. You won't see these little hole openings when I complete a deck system. They'll be completely covered over with film. You might see a small indentation, but that's it. Just beautiful. I would say on this project, you guys gotta remember, I think I did this in 2019. Even then, I likely saved these customers 20 grand. Easy. In today's terms, they would do tear down to, somebody would likely talk them into tear down to frame composite here. 27,000 in savings or more, likely. Beautiful deck. There's one of those knots that I'm talking about that I would focus more on now. Pretty. Super. Look at that, bud. Look how beautiful that is. From that mess that was there, right? That rotten mess that was there. Rotten boards, mildew growth everywhere, old disintegrating stain and all that all over. Look how beautiful. You don't need deck replacement. You don't need tear down of the frame replacement. You just need to switch to an industrial. Like, you need to get the restoration you need. Switch to an industrial grade elastomer, Kong armor, lifetime deck armor that comes with the continual care and warranty that you need. Most deck owners, they make the mistake of just, if they do refinish their deck, they throw some cheap stain or something like that on it. It doesn't have any resolution behind it. And they're not going to care for it. They know they're not, right? And so they get 5 to 8 years later, they're right back in a major restoration or replacement scenario. And that's what Kong helps you avoid. Just beautiful. I think that's it. Look, so big takeaways from this video, right? Kong armor. We have the experience where we can completely restore any deck system. And for our customers, we're only going to restore what's bad, and we're going to leave you with everything that's indefinitely viable on your deck system. So you keep everything you already own. Huge savings, right? Kong armor, the world's toughest deck armor. It can lock down and encapsulate disintegrating, flaking stains, paints, that type of stuff. The disintegrating stain that was on this deck system, we didn't sand it or do anything like that. We just washed it, and then we brought the Kong system in and then engulfed it whole, right? And just the fact that you don't need to go through replacement. You just don't. This deck was in horrible condition, and most people would talk these customers into tear down to the frame replacement. I'm happy that we were able to save them. And listen, Kong's just an amazing resurfacer, man. I see a lot of things. We call this deck armor rewind because I'm going back and looking at past projects that I did. So you got to understand that I didn't have a lot of the experience that I have now. I may not have had at that time. One of the big things that I would do over here would be more coating, more pressing into cracks, more filling in cracks and voids and that type of stuff with silverback epoxy or with our coating itself. And I would build this a lot higher today, right? So keep building it until we didn't have any of these nail and screw holes, any small cracks at all. I'll leave one. If there's more than that, we got to keep going, right? So today, and today's world, you guys know that I would build this deck system a lot higher and it would finish a lot more beautiful. But just looking back at how beautiful it did finish, the protection that Kong did provide them, and the restoration that we provided them, deck rescue painting, right? Beautiful deal. Look, if you want to learn more about Kong armor, its ability to lock down peeling deck paint, disintegrating flaking stains, our deck restoration painting process, deck rescue painting process, you can simply go to kongarmor.com. If you have questions, anything like that, where you guys want to reach out to me personally, my name's Anthony Ford. I'm the proprietor of Kong Armor here in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, Southeast Indiana. You can just simply write to anthony@kongarmor.com. If you got a question you want me to address on this show, Deck Armor Rewind, you can write me there and I'll address it on next week's show. I do this every Friday, 8 p.m. I'll take a look back at one of my previous peeling deck paint lockdown encapsulations, deck rescue painting projects, deck restoration painting projects, every Friday at 8 p.m. You guys can catch this on the Facebook business page, the YouTube channel, and wherever you're at. Please like and subscribe. See y'all next week.